Welcome. Thank you for being here. Welcome back. You are here in the Motherhouse Starter Series, the foundational course for mother law and complicit no more. We and my team here are Land Justice Futures, and we work with movement partners and religious communities to create land transitions rooted in ecological and racial healing. We seek to heal stories on sacred lands, to liberate land and relationships from colonial constraints in service of life. You can learn more about our work, our focus community program, and our public educational offerings about land justice from our website. This is session 4 of this starter series, focused on the origins of European patriarchy and the loss of the motherline. Hopefully y'all have been with us in this series, so you know what this Motherhouse Starter series is all about, mother law and complicit no more. And hopefully you also know about the relationships and movement context that this comes from. We are here to springboard our own remembering, to reclaim our authority and the mother law that lives within the seeds of our own cultures and lineages. As our long-term advisor and auntie Pat McCabe would say, we're here to put life at the center of all we do and to start living toward right relationship right now. In sessions 1, 2, and 3, we learned about mother law, the doctrine of discovery and its dehumanizing impacts on peoples, the disproportionate impact on those who've been colonized and enslaved, as well as those who have been doing the colonizing. And we also learned about the doctrine's damaging effect in our relationship with land. As you might remember from these conversations, the doctrine of discovery is an active legal doctrine that underpins the system of sovereignty and land title in the United States and many other nations that were colonized. This legal doctrine originates from a series of papal bulls, or letters from the Pope in Rome, which compelled European nations to invade, capture, and vanquish all non-Christians and subdue them into perpetual servitude. These papal bulls served as the legal, moral, spiritual, and political justification for the transatlantic slave trade, the genocide of indigenous peoples, and by 1914, the colonization of 84% of the land on Earth by European nations. It's key to understanding why today 98% of private rural land and 95% of private urban land are owned and controlled by white people. Beyond the law itself and its impact on land, the doctrine of discovery is a policy structure and a worldview still shaping and impacting us, our communities, and the many crises we face in the world today. It's a toxic inheritance that we seek to be complicit no more with as we move towards mother law. So learning about the doctrine of discovery can be extremely jarring and overwhelming. It can be very mind-boggling and emotionally disturbing. The depravity of the cruelty, the arrogance of the ideology, and the depth and scope of its violence. And for those of us who grew up with a very different and incomplete understanding of the church, we might ask ourselves, how can this be true? How could the church have done this in the name of Christianity? Well, today, in this session, we'll start to see how the doctrine evolved out of much older processes that had been initiated by the church, processes of empire and the control of women's bodies. Today will be a bit of a doozy, weaving together patriarchy, the early violences of the church against women, and how many of those same ideologies, strategies, and tactics were used against indigenous, Black, and non-Christian peoples via conquest, colonization, and enslavement, and set up our current system. We seek to more deeply understand how patriarchy undergirds racialized capitalism and colonization. So today we'll start with contemplating pre-patriarchal Europe, moving through some early church history that solidified rule by men and wiped out many indigenous traditions in Europe. We'll see how strategies like the witch hunts and the enclosure of the common lands were part of the projects to objectify and control the world via empire, and then developed into the extinction driving forces of capitalism and colonialism. We'll tap a little bit into the grief of what this has brought, what Pat McCabe calls this archetypal wounding and its impacts on the earth, as well as how it's showing up as wounding within us today. We have two incredible teachers and scholars with us, Max Dashu and Sarah Jelena Walcott, whose scholarship and teaching focuses on these subjects, and specifically their relationship with the witch hunts. We'll also hear a bit from Pat McCabe for our grounding prayer. Just a few housekeeping reminders. One is some energetic housekeeping. In all of this, we're midway through the course, and we want to recognize that each of these sessions could be their own course of study, lasting a long time, actually. And it probably feels like we're covering a lot in a little bit of time, which is true. This Motherhouse Starter Series is intended to be a foundational survey or a crash course that can help us begin deeper explorations of these subjects. So we know we're covering a lot, and there's so much more we could get into together. We intend to host a lot more sessions in the future where we can slow down, go deeper, linger, and zoom in and out with more spaciousness. And of course, there are many resources and places to go to complement this study, and we really encourage that. As always, you can find most of what you need on our course page, replays of sessions, homework, community guidelines, and I think the link is being dropped in the chat right now. Please stay on mute unless you're in breakouts or invited into some larger discussion. If you have questions during the sessions, please direct those to Amy or Brittany in the chat. They have tech in front of their names. During the first 30 minutes or so of today's teaching, we'll close the chat to invite everyone to remain present and attentive to our speakers. We'll open the chat for questions and remarks later on with our speakers. There will be moments where we ask you all to respond in the chat as well as unpack in small groups. We request to be mindful to not spam the chat with a bunch of resources. If there is a resource that you're really excited about and want to share, please email it to us, and we'll try to include it in a follow-up. And again, if you have other questions, you can be in touch with us after the session, and we'll try to be back with you as soon as possible. Again, we mentioned this last time, we've changed course for our breakout groups, given technical limitations and capacity limitations with such a big group. And so we are going to be using more randomized small groups. If you don't want to be in a breakout, just don't accept your assigned breakout room, and you can stay muted in the large group. And if you want to be put in a BIPOC only caucus space, please add a B, the letter B, to the beginning of your name on Zoom. You can rename yourself. If you have trouble with that, you can direct message Brittany in the chat or Amy in the chat. Everyone else will be randomly grouped into crews of 4 or 5. Okay, so with that, logistics done. We'd like to first ground together with a prayer that Pat has shared with us for this particular occasion. She's traveling from ceremony right now in Japan, and we wish her safe travels today as she does that. And we'll listen to her words. She is deeply connected to what we're talking about today, having organized trips of Indigenous women of Turtle Island and European descended women to do ceremony at sites of the witch burnings in Europe. And so it's very important to weave her voice in. So if you have a candle, I invite you to light it as we quiet our minds and join our presence together, and maybe close our eyes or look at the window as we join Pat in this prayer for our time together.
Good morning from Tokyo. This is Pat McCabe, Wayakpa Najinwi, Woman Stand Shining, and I've been invited to make a prayer on behalf of your meeting in regards to the witch hunts and how that has affected so many things. And in fact, my guides named that time an archetypal wounding of humanity. And the way that I interpret that is that was a very powerful, very consequential fork in the road, and the choices that we made engaging in those activities have been playing out ever since, and they have kind of almost an undue effect on us and on in our lives today. And so that's the standpoint that I come from here. And so yeah, I'm going to make a prayer on behalf of that wounding. And I would just want to say thank you for the work that you're going to do today, even though I can't be there in person. It's there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of spiritual help available as we right ourselves from that archetypal wounding and make a new choice. So, thank you. Wakam tanka tukashila unshimaka shema shiche. Holy people all around, it's me Wayakpa Najiwi coming before you on this holy day in Pitukile. I reach out to you with my relatives here. I reach out to all of the holy helpers, all the ways that you express yourself and offer spiritual help, offer insight, offer illumination, offer possibility, offer the chance to make a new choice, the chance to renew ourselves, the chance to see ourselves in a new way. And so I just ask that you be with my relatives today as they explore and make this study of these events that took place. To be honest, I don't really know their origin. I just know what you showed me. You showed me what took place in Europe, and you showed me that it was the destruction of indigenous Europe. You showed me that it was the beginning of the rise of the systematic path, the systematic almost science of dismantling the way of the circle, the way of interconnectedness, the way of sovereignty of all beings that reflects that sacred hoop of life that is this Mother Earth, in which we are interdependent, in which we are interrelated, in which we are so we're interbeing. we're one life. And so to dismantle the way of the circle and to form that into the way of the power over paradigm, the way of the pyramid, in which all the fruits of the labor travel from the many to the few. We're looking at that today. And so I ask you to join in this circle today, to break up what we think we know. Help us to set aside everything we think we know about that time period, everything we think we know about how things are, everything we think we know about how these power structures came into being, everything we think we know about our freedom and autonomy, that we can be open to a new experience and understand the undue influences. I ask for you to watch over each and every one as we explore these topics that are so tender, that bring up so much emotion for us in our hearts, in our minds, in our bodies, in our spirits. Whichever side, quote unquote, whatever side of the story we find ourselves on, there is much to reflect on. And there is much that can come to the fore now. You have said to me that we have a powerful way of story in our hands, and that is when we retell the old story. You say, when we retell the old stories with new understanding, with context, with new information, with new heart, with new willingness, that we can automatically change our trajectory into the future. So in that spirit, I just ask that you help us to see and know and speak and feel that retelling of this story, and that we can together turn and look for the path that you can help us illuminate forward, so that we can have one mind, one heart, one body, one prayer, and come into omnibeneficence, an omnibeneficent presence with this Mother Earth. So grateful for you convening this circle and this way of the mother law, this way of complicit no more, this way of really, really examining the context of the stories that we hold, that we can genuinely be open to a new experience, a new co-creation of harmony, balance, peace, and thriving life. Oh, mitakwe oyasin.
And myself.
Amen. Well, thank you to Pat, sending you love as you fly home today. At this point, I'd love to bring up our speakers and introduce them. I'm gonna add these spotlights real quick. Where are you? Where's Sarah? Oh, there she is. Okay. Hello. Thank you both for being here. I'll give some brief introductions so that folks know a little bit more of who you are, and then we'll get into it. We have with us Max Dashu and Sarah Jolena Walcott. Max is a feminist historian, author, and creator of the Suppressed Histories Archive. She founded the Suppressed Histories Archive in 1970 to research and document women's history from the most ancient times to the present globally. She teaches with images from the cultural record and is internationally known for her expertise on iconography, matricultures, and female spheres of power, medicine women, witches, and the witch hunts, and how patriarchy, colonization, and systems of domination develop and intertwine. Her books include Witches and Pagans, Women in European Folk Culture, 700 to 1100, and Women in Greek Mythography, Pythias, Melissae, and Taitanides. Her newest book looks at church-state authoritarianism and religious persecution. She has produced 2 films and a library of free videos on her YouTube channel, which I highly recommend, and many more stream on demand via her Suppressed Histories portal on Teachable. An independent scholar, Max blogs daily on her Suppressed Histories page on Facebook with over 250,000 followers. So, wow. Thank you, Max, for being here. And we have Sarah Jolena with us, who is a minister, healer, educator, speaker, spiritual director, and legacy advisor. She serves individuals and organizations who are being summoned by Earth to remember, to re-enchant, and create differently in our perilous and precious times. You can learn more about her courses on circular time and remembering, her resources and booklets, ceremony offerings, and consultation offerings at sequoiasamanvaya.com. So knowing both of your work a bit, I've anticipated this session with a lot of exhilaration and a little bit of trepidation. It's an intense one, and we're going to be weaving a lot of threads together: patriarchy, imperialism, subjugation of women and women's labor, theft of labor, natural resources and land, colonialism, enclosures. It's a lot. And so I just want to say, I know we're only going to be scratching the surface with you, and I know these stories are a lot to take in. They're stories that have been glazed over, hidden, disconnected from one another, and suppressed. And I just want to ask you and invite you, before we begin, if either of you could say a few words or bits of advice for how you'd invite our participants to listen to and take in these stories, with the goal being new understanding, but also personal and collective transformation.
It's very difficult to get the information that we're going to be sharing. It's hidden from us. It has tremendous emotional impact, both in the hardship and the horror of the processes, the historical processes, suppressions that we're going to describe. But there's also something healing in knowing that this is what it took to transform matricultures and indigenous societies and land-based cultures into domination systems. So that it's the bitter medicine we have to drink in order to blow past the barriers, internal, emotional barriers, the lack of knowledge that everything has been structured around. So this is needful knowledge, and it's painful. And we just have to be able to sit with that, and it's going to deepen things for us, for understanding.
Sarah, thank you, Max.
Yeah, everything that Max said, when I was so surprised when I first started teaching around some of these histories, not just how horrible it is, but how much, as people engage in the process, what I refer to as remembering, people, men and women and everyone, they're able to deepen and ground, and it actually helps to ground people more. That said, I also want to really these histories these histories aren't going anywhere. And if at any time during whatever, today or when you're engaging with them, you need to turn off your camera, look out of the screen, stretch, move around, come back later, use your, trust what your instinct is, and protect yourself, in the moment, and know that you can keep coming back. The invitation is to keep coming back, and to keep protecting yourself in whatever that looks like for you. And this is full body autonomy. You need to move, you need to stretch, you need to wiggle, you need to go off camera. It's just this is about reclaiming agency and autonomy. It's not about body discipline. So just really engaging is incredibly powerful and freeing. And the process of engaging has to be one of freedom as well.
Yeah.
I would just add one more thing, which is that this is not about the past. This is about what brought us to where we stand today and what we're confronting in very real terms.
Yeah. Yeah. When we get into some of this with our focus communities, we talk about trying to stay in the growth zone, not wanting to be in the panic zone, and not letting ourselves slip into comfort or, numbing out, but really trying to practice the growth zone. And just want to name, getting disorganized by these stories is also how we transform. So just allowing all of those things to be true. Well, thank you for that. We're going to get started. Max is going to start with some historical setup. Sarah Jelena will give some response, and then we'll move through into the rest of our time together. So thank you, Max. You have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, so everything we've just said, just take this in. I'm going to be concentrating mainly on the dynamics that led us to where we are now. And there will be other times to talk in more depth about the mother-in-law heritages in Europe, but I am going to touch on those here and there. But, really what I'm trying to do is here make connections between conquest and the authoritarian regimes that arose, not just in Europe, but around the Mediterranean, and, how that led us to settler colonialism. And so I begin paying respects to the ancient grandmothers of the Paleolithic era. This is mother-in-law in material form, the testimony that they left to us all the way across Eurasia, from France through Russia and Ukraine, all the way into the Baikal region of Siberia. They're not Venus figurines, they're ancestral mothers. They show us a ceremonial practice of loving these icons of the mothers, the grandmothers, over tens of thousands of years. This is the cultural record that we have to look back at. And then we come through time. There are many, many peoples that come into Europe. And so the Anatolian farmers come in and intermingle eventually with the ancient foraging peoples, the descendants of those Stone Age times. And these farmers erected grandmother stones. The ancestral women are very much in the cultural record. And so I think these were matrilineal societies. And I'll just share with you, this is an image of many of them. And we can see that these occurred in France, especially northern France, in the Channel Islands, in Italy, in the northwest and the southeast, in Sardinia, in Ukraine, in many parts of Europe, in Spain as well. And so I'm just putting this here to stand for these mother lines that were there for thousands of years, and they form the substratum, the cultural depths upon which the later colonizations of Indo-Europeans come in. And so there are these overrunnings, just as what happened to the Americas. And you have colonizers eventually intermarrying with the elder kindreds. This is the term I use for the most ancient indigenous peoples. And their languages override whatever was spoken before. So only Basque in the far southeast, southwest, and Sami in the north survive of the older tongues. But even with these colonizations, because there are waves of them, we see a cultural continuity, and it's through the mothers. And this is starting to show up in the genomic mtDNA, that those mothers continued to carry along their culture. So that even in Indo-European times, we see matriculture, we see mother-law in ritual form, ceremonial offering pots of the mothers in Slovakia, in Eastern Germany, in Northern Italy. And these icons also show up in the Balkans. I could do whole shows just on the symbolism of this reflection of ceremonial practice. But I'm going to just try to give you a taste of all of this, because this is our heritages. And then in the times of the Roman Empire, we see the mothers, matronae, these are Latin titles, but in Germania, they call them matronae, and there are many, many stone altars with 3 women, the mothers. And we see them called matres, again, the mothers, in Britain and France. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these that existed. But what happens is that a system of military conquest, unlike anything yet seen in history, grows up as the Roman Empire. And the legions swarm across Europe, and they conquer all of these regions. You can see on the map down here, all of France, Spain, part of Britain, the whole hem of North Africa and West Asia, Asia Minor. All of this is taken over by this machine of military might. And it's based also on an economy of slavery. And so the legionaries would take captives on the battlefields or the towns and villages that they conquered. And they were followed by slave traffickers who they would auction the captives to, and then those captives would be sent across the Roman Empire into slavery. So you can see a foreshadowing of what happened later to Africans and also to Native peoples, and history that's not as much known. And so you will see in the Roman art some representations of this brutal process. And Tacitus describes several centuries into this process, because they drafted conquered men into the armies, which happened to Native people in North America too. It is by the blood of the provinces that the provinces are conquered. And this is true. So in Italy itself, where the Roman Empire grew up, the small farmers, and those as well in the conquered provinces, began to lose their lands to taxation and debt. And gradually, they were driven into serfdom. This started just before the Christianization of the empire. And here's a very important connection. In Latin, they were called coloni. And this is from a Latin verb, colere, which means to cultivate, till, inhabit, to respect, tend, guard. These are land-based, basic subsistence cultures. They're raising food, and they're having an interrelationship with the land and the spirits of the land. But from this root comes, and also from the exploitation of the coloni as serfs, come our words colony, colonize, settler colonialism. And so you can see this relationship of something that comes from internal colonization of Europeans that then fans out in this massive system of domination and is spread across the world. So in 306, Constantine becomes emperor of the entire Roman realms. And he made up a story about a vision he had before an important battle. And he saw a cross, and it said, "By this sign, conquer." And so this is the mythologization of conquest, because he had told this story before. He had said that he had a vision of Apollo. So he was checking his bets of what would work the best. And he went with Christianization of the Roman Empire. It begins with him. So then we have added to what is already a deeply patriarchal empire with a slavery economy, a domination system. Now we have church-state religion. Religion by decree, only one religion is legal. And it's an authoritarian structure, a mixture of church and state hierarchy. And what do? They persecute the pagans, which are basically the old ethnic religions of all of those provinces. They persecuted the Jews, which is the senior religion whose Bible they claim as their authorization. And they persecuted Christians that did not fit under the Orthodox umbrella. So they're called heretics. But really, many times, these are regional Christianities with ethnic characteristics, like the round dances and ecstatic singing that we see in North Africa and Spain and other places. And I'll just mention here in passing that early Christians did have female leadership. There were no physical churches. Women hosted house churches. And so we see inscriptions like this, Leta presbytera, Leta the priest. And we know that this means priest and not wife of a priest because her husband was not a priest. So, there's evidence like this. But we also have testimony from Britannia, a Celtic region, where there were female conhospites, basically means co-hosts. They were raising the chalice in the Eucharist. And the old Irish say that Bishop Nell ordained St. Bridget to be a bishop. And Pope Gregory the First, this is around 600, year 600, is scolding Sicilians because they were having women officiate in the Mass. All of this gets stopped by about that time, and men push women out of the priesthood. So you've got that patriarchal aspect. But you also have a persecutory mentality. And so both people of the older faith and also many Christian groups were being accused of performing devilish rites, of being devil worshippers, in fact, of being possessed or sorcerers. And there are these stories circulating at that time where pagans, Christians, but especially Jews, the blood libel starts with Jews. Ritual cannibalism is the accusation. This was not happening. These are persecutory myths. And so you have the emperors in the name of the church torturing and executing people, burning them at the stake, throwing them to beasts in the arena, as had happened to Christians since the time of Nero. Or the law codes say, they shall be struck with the avenging sword. The goods confiscated, they were exiled, various methods of repression. And so after Rome falls, we have several centuries of this, from the 300s, mid 300s, all the way into the 600s, especially in the Eastern Empire, which lasted longer. But these patterns of male domination and class domination of the majority, the peasantry, continue into the feudal era. And so again, you've got the alliance of aristocrats with the church, and they are the state, and their whole economy is built on extracting labor from people who are actually creating wealth and food. But in this time also, we're talking about 500 to 1000. People are still clinging to their old traditions. They revere the sacred waters. Water is life. The stones, the trees. They have their seasonal festivals and their ways of blessing and healing and divination. And it's really important to understand that Europeans had a lot in common with all the rest of the world. Sacred dance, chant, invocation, ancestor reverence. We had sweat houses. We had the drum once upon a time. And there were ways of speaking to herbs and honoring them before gathering them, or entering into ecstatic spiritual states in order to prophesy and heal. We once had songs and ceremonies and round dances, but all this gets redefined as demonic. And the bishops called it devil worship. And they scolded people who were calling on goddesses while they were weaving or sowing the grain. And some of those incantations to earth and mother have survived in Anglo-Saxon. from a little over 1,000 years ago. So we have one penitential book, which was written in Latin and translated into Old English, and a very interesting addition to this line. They bring their offering to earth-fast stone, and also to trees and well springs. Swa wikan tech, as the witches teach. What this is showing us is that the witches, number one, were regarded as spiritual authorities. Number two, they adhered to a reverence for the divine in nature, the sacred waters and all the rest, the plants, the animals. This is an earth-based spirituality. Trying to advance the slide here. There we go. But what happens is what they defined as devil worship. They invent a story which basically takes the old festival dances around bonfires and the feasting, and stories about the women who go by night with the goddess, which could have any of various ethnic names, but the Latin sources usually call her Diana. This is all a deception of the devil. There's a text called the Canon Episcopi that talks about this. And they called this all devil worship, and they said Diana is the devil, which you see Tomás de Torquemada talking about still in the 1400s in the Spanish Inquisition. Now, I want to sidebar a little bit here, because also a lot of Central Europe and Northeastern Europe, we're talking about after 1000 and into the late 1300s, was still pagan. And so we have this policy. This is not a papal bull, but this policy, whoever baptizes is the rule. And so the church hierarchy is recognizing that if warlords invade and take over territories, they get to be recognized as the rulers as long as they convert their subjects. So this is the ground, the assumptions upon which the doctrine of discovery is later really specifically laid out. And they actually fought crusades against the pagans. First the Saxons, and then the Wends, who are Slavic people in what was once East Germany. And then they keep moving east, and Livonia, Estonia, Old Prussia, Lithuania are subjugated by the Teutonic Knights. And they compete with the Russians and the Danes, who's going to get lordship over these lands. And so this idea that rulership comes with converting the heathen was very closely connected to this idea of the old ethnic religions are devil worship. And it was used here, and it was used later across the world to excuse the seizure of land, driving people into serfdom, enslaving them, and even committing genocide. Now to the witch burnings. There's the first witch burnings, though the church was involved in the persecution, but they were really secular over most of the early Middle Ages. So you have kings and secular lords. This is an illustration probably of Exodus, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, but it's shown completely in Old English form. The woman's being led not to the stake, but to a pyre. And over here is an iron bar. He's looking at this. This is the ordeal that she failed, because holding red hot iron will burn you. And the ordeal you could only pass if after 3 days there were no burn marks from you carrying or walking upon this incandescent iron. So the witch hunts begin to unfold slowly from the royal law codes in the early Middle Ages. And here you see a municipal example from Spain. And again, referring to the iron ordeal. And so this is something that was going on, especially in Western Europe. And here again, burning witches on a pyre, and it goes from the royal laws, and also the feudal lords were doing this in their own authority over the peasants on their land. And then you have the civic magistrates also making city laws in places like Italy and Germany, burning witches, persecutions that predominantly of women. And so you see this reflected at Lyon Cathedral, where you've got the witch riding on the goat and naked with a cape. This is a meme that's very much around. And here's the Lord in his tower with his men, and they're sending out mastiffs after the witch. So the hunting of witches this is one of the rare representations of something that we have written record of from the chronicles and also from law codes, but very, very little representation of what went on. But these burnings were happening. And, I've written something about this. You'll be able to see more of it as I publish it on the Suppressed History site. But then another important development happens, because in 1252, a papal bull revives judicial torture, which had been practiced not only by the Romans, but also the Greeks before them. And its title means stamping out, ad extirpanda. And so the inquisitors, by the end of the 1200s, were already beginning to persecute witches, and very much tied in initially with goddess veneration in the trial records. And the accusations of devil worship quickly rise to the fore in this whole mythology that was basically theologians' interpretation of folk tradition, but a demonization of it governs the ideology of these hunts. And so the idea of witches gathering, their festivals are now being projected as devil worship. And there are torture trials. So accused women are forced to parrot back whatever fantasies the demonologists, witch judges wanted to hear. This is at Tally, that walnut tree of the witches, and people dancing around it. So you have writings side by side, the persecutory mythology, and then also the real folk basis of the traditions is still in play. So in this Swiss witch trial, you see women dancing with animals or men in animal masks, which is part of the old pagan heritage of Europe that we shared with the rest of the world. And then this is all supposed to be demonic. And then you've got women tied to beams and thrown onto a pyre. And so the horror of the burning times begins to explode. This is a mass terror. And estimates range, usually about 80% of those executed were female. And you have sometimes more in some regions. The places where there were the fewest persecutions tend to be those where men were preponderant. Very, very few trials in Iceland or Finland on the peripheries of all of this. And so this carnage goes on for hundreds of years across first Western Europe, spreading into Central Europe, and then even into Eastern Europe in a later period. Shaved their heads, stripped them naked, burned them alive on all kinds of pretexts. So they're blamed for everything that went wrong. If somebody's horse went lame, if a baby died, if an animal died, if the hailstorms destroyed the crops, these women made a convenient scapegoat. And let us not forget that in this time period, the peasant risings were going on and were being beaten down. The enclosures are starting to happen as well. And so you have a redirection of popular wrath toward innocent women instead of the more dangerous target, which is the oppressors, the lords that are controlling the land. So one of the great, that's the wrong word, but the most popular of the demonologies was the Malleus Maleficarum. And you have two inquisitors authoring this piece. And here the symbolism here is very great, because you have a naked, defiant woman pointing to her tongue. So female speech is very much demonized here. And then God the Father, God the Son, presiding over this. It's all being approved by the Divine Father. So these inquisitors begin to propagate some of these demonological pornographies. And carnal lust, which is in women, is insatiable. And this is something that was projected not only in the Malleus, which also targets midwives and various other groups of women, but also this idea that witches had sex with the devil. There was this obsession with sexuality. And here you see an animalized devil, and we're also beginning to see black devils come into the mix in the torture chamber. The women under torture, and some went to the death without ever saying what these men wanted, but others, to put a stop to the torture, would confess, and I put that in quotes. We do have a few men defending women, and so this satire, The Champion of Women, 1440, is satirizing the accusation that old women were riding on sticks to the Valley of the Whores, Valput, to see the whorish synagogue. And this word synagogue was used a lot, just as the word Sabbath from Shabbat, from Jewish Shabbat. Anti-Semitism, as well as racism, is in the mix of this roiling cauldron of demonizations and accusations. Oh God, what horror, the woman is married to the devil. So this caught fire. It was like a conspiracy theory that spread. And we see the racialized side of it here. This is maybe around 1300 or so. The idea of black devils. We all would already see that in the Stuttgart Gospels in the 7th century, in Ireland in written form. But the idea of black devils carrying off white women is part, and all the myths that were evolved in the torture chamber became part of the persecutory mentality in the slave traffic of the colonizing Europeans. But what were the actual key issues in these witch hunts? There was sexual politics to a large extent. Men beating up women, deserting their wives and leaving them with hungry children, contraception, abortion, miscarriage, and this is all labeled from a very early period by the bishops as homicide, as well as witchcraft. And then men saying that, I can't get it up, it must be her fault. Some woman cast a spell on me. Any kind of harmful events would be blamed on witches. And you have also women accused who had been begging for food. And if they refused and they said angry words, then something went wrong. Oh, she put a spell on me, and she would go to the stake, to the torture chamber. And also sexual abuse comes through in some of these narratives, where girls living in as servants are visited at night by devils. And we also see pagan survivals in the trial transcripts, so I'm not going to go into that, not enough time. But our primary target of accusation is a common woman, and often old or middle-aged. These are where the chain of accusations always begin, and as it reaches a certain critical mass of wealthy people or of men, then the shutoff valve begins. It cuts it off, and it stops for a while in that place. And then a generation later, it may start up again. And so there are these flare-ups that happen over time. And the accusations were based around the idea that this woman, by the power of her own evil thoughts, magically could cause harm at a remote distance to others. And that she was essentially evil and a threat to the community. And so they shunned and attacked and beat her, tortured and killed her, slashed her with knives to draw blood, and that was thought. Scoring a boon the breath, is what they called it in Scotland, would somehow break the spell. And these could be formal judicial trials, but there was also a lot of extrajudicial judicial lynchings, often led by male witchfinders and basically ignored by the powers that be. And it became so pervasive in the culture of Europe, the suspicion that settled upon any nonconformist or outspoken woman. Mais quoi, on dit que toutes femmes sont sorcières. Look, they say all women are witches. And this was something that was recognized by the hunters themselves. And this one, where we burn one man, we burn maybe 10 women. And so the targeting is very clear. And this had a massive effect on European culture, the mentality in which women were raising their children, trying to keep them cautious and shut them up, make it safer for them. And these are the legacies that we live with. It was never digested. And it got really, really bad. Burning terror goes on for centuries, and it changed everything integrally within those cultures. And here we see a horrific scene with, again, the shaven heads and the stripped naked. They are burning en masse in the late 1500s, Switzerland. So Mary Beard speaks to the silencing of women. And this, of course, goes back to Roman times, Greek times. We have various proverbs and things. But here's a witch judge in France. I believe that for whoever wants to tie the devil's arms, it will be necessary to take women out of the world. And he was doing his best to make that happen. We also have not just those who were burned, but those who were attacked and punished and shunned. So female gags, the witch's bridle or the scold's bridle, head cages of iron, placed over women. They were forced to stand in public, or they were paraded through the streets in rituals of humiliations. Women, shut up. You have no say in anything. This is a man's world. All the time this is happening, we're starting to see the enclosures really take off in the 1500s and the 1600s. In England, you have the diggers and the levelers who are fighting for the commons, for common land, the place where people can farm and earn a subsistence. But the peasant revolts got crushed. The witch hunts continued to divide and conquer. They broke the consensus of the common people against their overlords by 1300. The land enclosures driving people off of the land they had lived on for many, many generations. And those landless people then emigrate to the colonies. Some of them fled to the cities, or they went into indenture and got on a boat, pay their passage. They served for 7 years. Some were forcibly dragged off, like the Irish that were taken to Barbados by Cromwell's forces. But then these dispossessed people eventually also became part of a European overrun, seizing the lands of indigenous.
Max, you are somehow muted. We just lost you.
I try to move my control panel and then I hit mute. So Euro settlers brought with them private property, fencing. And so this is enclosure again, and class hierarchy and patriarchy. And they created a racialized caste system. And so this doctrine of terra nullius, that is also active in Australia, by the way, and all of this is within the context of a deeply patriarchal settler society. So multiple interlocking oppressions. And then just to mention here also that free Black people who did build towns and villages like Seneca Village in Manhattan were forced out for the building of Central Park. They were just dispossessed and booted out. And we have Black towns and neighborhoods crushed and people expelled in Rosewood, Florida, Black Tulsa, Wilmington, North Carolina, horrific political coup that broke an alliance between Black and white laborers. And you have a continued stealing of Black farmers' land. Imagine the difficulty they had in acquiring it in the first place by whites who could simply take it over by their friendships with the judge. And all of this also happened to emancipated people across the Americas, in the wake of the slave plantations. And so this is something that's still happening. The seizure of land is still going on all around the Americas and beyond. Meanwhile, all of this enclosure is still going on in Europe. And so Scotland is the Highland clearances. They burn the crofts, they throw people out, they march them off with military escorts, beating them up along the way. And they too join the wave of settlers coming into North America, Australia, and other places. So backing up a bit here, this colonization, as we have learned, is the papal bulls here. Portugal is authorized to start trafficking in slaves along the coasts of Western Africa. And we have Spain authorized, and they actually draw this line in the Treaty of Tordesillas to, you can stay on this side, you can stay on that side, you can have all these lands, you can colonize and enslave, but you convert them. And that makes it all good. That, you're bringing the benefits of church and state to superior civilization as they saw it. And so the conquistadores would come and they would read out the requerimiento in Spanish. I claim this land in the name of the Empire of Spain. And of course, nobody understood what they were saying. And the Puritans were doing this too. And they're thanking their God for the epidemics that wiped out a lot of coastal Atlantic, North America. And they fought the remainder of people, seized their lands, and they sold the native people into slavery. This is a missing part in many people's picture. The Pequot were shipped off to the Caribbean, never to see their lands and relatives again. And there were many other cases like that. So burning at the stake is brought by the early Spanish colonials. And you have the Taino chief, Wate, defiant at the stake. They tried to make him convert, and he says, well, are you going to be in heaven? And so, yes, of course. Well, then I don't want to go any place that would have such people as you, and they burned him. And then also I don't know, much about this, but this image from Champlain in Eastern Canada. So you have these initial burnings, and it's very important to understand here the deep connections. We have Juan de Zumarraga in the Basque Country of Spain, hunting witches in the 520s. And then he moves to Mexico, becomes Bishop of Mexico, and he's burning Aztecs at the stake in the 1530s. So there are very direct connections between the persecution of predominantly common women in in Europe to the colonizations and the ideologies that govern those colonizations in the Americas and the Pacific and many other places. So here from Peru, we have a witch persecuted very much in European mode with her animal familiars. And then it says here, this is judicial punishment, Santa Inquisición, the Holy Inquisition. So all of this is exported. And in the ideas were the demonization of blackness, all dark peoples. Black devils, white angels, these poisons were carried along and became part of folk festivals. The Peruvian Moros y Santos, all kinds of things. And so this is a very deep internal colonization of people's mentality. And once again, we see this idea of devil worship being projected upon the indigenous religions. So here in Virginia, this is total fantasy from someone who probably never even set foot in Virginia. Here, the Taínos worshiping a demonized goddess. Devil worship, this is the idea. And this witch judge, Jean Baudin in France, wrote a whole book about this. And he says, the gods of these countries are none other than the devil. So the same mentality is now being applied in the European colonization as they run across the Americas, taking slaves, putting people into peonage. We've got the slave traffic of Africans also going on simultaneously and actually taking over as the primary pattern of enslavement in these European colonies. This is Paraguay, women and children being marched off.
Hey, Max,
Yes.
if we would like to give Sarah some time to respond,
Uh-huh.
do you think that do you think you could wrap with
Yeah, I'm going to wrap it. I'm almost done.
Oh, great.
So all of these ideologies, the idea of manifest destiny is taking place. Westward, the course of empire takes its way. We have one case that I know of white women protesting the genocide of Native people. And they are saying, we solemnly and earnestly appeal to save this remnant of a much injured people from annihilation. But this was very rare, and we don't have that history either. So these are cultures of persecution. We've got pogroms, we've got lynchings and lynch mobs. We have the Crusaders, the Klan, the witch burnings, all coming together in a process of colonization that becomes global and decolonization that follows it. And the point is that all these systems of domination are intertwined. And so conquest and domination, patriarchy and diabolism, this is all a rationale for oppression, for genocide. We have the mission system, the boarding schools, all of these things happened. And this is what we are now aiming to overcome. And we have to look also at the Christian dominionists who want to bring all of this back in a new form. We have to fight that. Speaker of the House currently is belonging to that group. And so in this sign conquer is still a mentality among the far right and the white supremacists. But we have the fight back. And they're speaking out against femicide amongst Native women at tremendous rates. You've got the leaders of the land back movement and the sovereignty movement upholding the treaty rights. We have women all over the Americas who are fighting to stop dams and logging and mining, and sometimes succeeding and get more and more land back is starting to happen. And so we give thanks for that. We stand with the First Nations because we are the granddaughters of the witches that you could not burn. So let us remember all our mother-law heritages. Thanks. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Max. I'm gonna pass it right over to Sarah for a response and holding so much of what you shared. Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you, Max, for the decades of work, and the generations before you that have enabled you to share this with us today. And the hours and hours and hours of being with tragic and horror to share and to support all of us. I'm going to stand up. I invite everyone to take a moment to stand up, to move your body. I realize that my candle like is kind of reaching the end, so I'm going to light a new candle. As I light this new candle, I invite everyone to come. Let us have a better relationship with fire. Light a new candle of life. We so need fire, and we have so misused it. We so need each other, and we have so misused one another. I don't want to go into any slides at this second. I just want to kind of give you a chance to just be with what you've seen, be with what you've heard. I'm going to sing a prayer. And I just, move if you need to move, sing, hum, make a noise. Today, in this moment, your voice is not silenced. Today, in this moment, you are still here. Today, in this moment, your body is alive and you are amongst the ones who have survived. Today, in this moment, you can hear the drumbeat of your heart. Today, in this moment, you can join hands with your sisters and your brothers and all of your beings, both human and non-human, around you. Today, in this moment, you are not as trapped. Today, in this moment, you can move. Today, in this moment, your voice is alive. One of my students taught me that in those old images from Crete, from the Minoan civilization, the women are always reaching their hands up to the sky. And they stand reaching to the stars and to the heavens. So don't forget that to recover and to heal, we have to lift our hands to the sky and sink our feet into the ground to let ourselves become undone.
Hey, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to confirm if you'd seen my notes about timing because we're a little behind. Do you think we could do like 5-10 minutes and then move into a conversation about legacy?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna just share, as Sarah Jane just said, I'm gonna share one or two quick things. Part of the disjointedness within the self, the disorientation, is really necessary. And that has to do with like what's happened and how the brain works with metaphors. So the disorientation and the grief has not been attended to and is part of the necessary part of the healing. Just two or three quick thoughts, which is that, as you're looking at the old patriarchal myths, including things like the myths of the Pleiades, we're seeing in like Greco-Roman mythology, in this, and Max was touching on this, we're seeing in Greco-Roman mythology the continuation of the patriarchy, the exasperation of the patriarchy coming over the matriarchy. So when we reach back and when we look for alternative stories, we often reach into Greco-Roman mythology and pagan mythology. And just to remember that you have to often reach back further, and sometimes you have to like recreate and create new stories as well as reaching back into old stories, because a lot of the stories that are kind of that we can easily reach to within the European tradition are themselves filled with rape and violence. Max talked about a lot of different aspects. It's worth noting that in addition to like the devil being a base in both the witch hunts in Europe as well as overseas. There's also like this clear political economy of the theft of land and natural resources. I'm skipping most of this. It's important, like, yeah, I'm going to skip most of this for right now because I want us to be able to move into conversation. The witch bowl the witch bowl that Max mentioned is in 1484. So that's right in between the other main papal bulls that we've been learning about through Sarah Augustine and Jessica Ingersmill and Bronte and Mary and Mama Bear and Michelle. They've all talked about the doctrine of discovery in these different ways. The witch bowl falls right in between these other bowls. And so what you have is what I often talk about as a triangle of terror, in which simultaneously you have these places in Africa, in the Americas, and in Europe, in which those feminized beings are being separated from their places. This is a diagram. You can look at it later. I don't want you to kind of get into the intellectualness of it right now, but you can but it just looks at like there's some very strong similar timelines that is leading to environmental destruction, that's leading to a lot that's perpetuating in sexism, perpetuating the transatlantic slave trade, and perpetuating in what we think of as colonization more generally. And I have some poems in the slideshow that you're going to be getting. I'm just sort of assessing here. I feel that I don't want to, I feel like there's so much that has been shared already. I don't want to kind of put more thought into it. I want to kind of give space for the somatic and for that which can move between and within us. So I'm going to be like kind of just closing this actually for the moment and say there's a lot more here and we have a lot more chances for conversations. But I really just like want to give us a chance to open into our shared time and to say that these are all, like I kind of want to just show you a couple of slides so you can see a couple of images to try to see how this interconnection of these things happened historically and how it impacts us today. But in this moment, it's just so critical to let ourselves feel whatever we're feeling and to let ourselves be, because like underneath the anger and the grief and the despair underneath all of that is something else, and you can't get there unless you go through. So I want us to kind of just be together in this moment of going through and in.
Mhm. Yeah, in the interest of that, I guess I would love, you both have talked a bit about with me the legacies of the witch hunts and the witch burnings. And, I feel like there are some obvious connections to make about the legacies that live with us today. And I'm curious, what for you wants to be most named in this moment in terms of how these are alive in our society today, and what are more subtle, hidden, but still very dangerous legacies that are embedded in our culture and haven't been digested or even acknowledged.
I think the acceptability of dishonoring behavior toward women, violence toward women, silencing of women is very much a legacy. Female deference to male authority, the assumption of male authority. A man in the street can tell a woman, smile. And women will often smile because it's unconsciously going along with, it's like the socialization is so profound. And what we looked at here is the roots of where that came from. But it's many centuries, even millennia deep. And I think we have to undergo a process of reawakening. And this is internal. It's very much about what's in our bodies, the memories we carry that we don't even, some of them we don't even remember them, but they affect us, the ways that we were encoded and magnetized emotionally to subordination. And all of that goes as well for the racialized scripts. There are all these axes of domination. We have to recover sovereignty over our own bodies and our own consciousness.
So the loss of the circle that Pat named in her opening prayer, the circle of between human and more than human, that like, Max showed this really beautifully, the demonization of bodies, human bodies, but also the demonization of animal bodies and birds and dragons and fantastical creatures and the earth herself, right, is deeply demonized in this period. And the Black Plagues play a really big role on that as well. But like the brokenness of, there was a time, I remember the time, I have had visions have come to me to remember the time when my ancestors stood in that circle and understood exactly how to live in that circle. Like I know I have, I've seen that. That's been gifted to me. And I know they cast prayers that we can return to it. That all of us can return to that circle because they saw it breaking. Um, within the kind of growing like witchy movement, which like I'm some level I'm a part of that. There remains which really bothers me deeply. There remains a tendency to continue to disassociate the witch burnings in Europe from the colonization of the rest of the world, and I'm speaking about particularly of white women in Europe as well as in the Americas. And the tendency to disconnect those two things as if they're part of a separate history. The witch hunts could not have happened, and the breakup of the commons would not have happened without the colonial moment, because the breakup of the commons is only possible because of the gaining of wealth from particularly Mexico. So like you cannot understand these things as separated, and they continue to be separated, and it perpetuates the tendency for where actually you don't find your true authority without that connectivity. Like the power and the authority that comes from earth is one of that comes, it happens through interbeing. It doesn't happen through the solo, I've been hurt and I'm going to take power back because I was victimized. All of us have victim and all of us have perpetuator in our ancestral lines. And so part of this is like, there's just this tendencies to um to miss the interbeing-ness. And that's because the circle's been broken.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear you naming like the tendency to bypass the racialized component of colonization from the subjugation of women in Europe. And I know that if we had a lot more time, Sarah, you would speak a lot more to exactly how the enclosures and the rise of private property within Europe is deeply tied to the economy that was changing and transforming because of colonization, because of colonial wealth. And so, you know, there are even more connections to be made in terms of how these projects are all dynamically connected with one another, and informing one another and shaping one another. And so, yeah, I hope that that's something that is relayed to folks today, as well as this invitation to agency, this invitation to the circle. Thank you both so much. I'm going to pass it to my colleague and sister, Brittany, who's gonna move us towards our small groups with a brief interlude to digest. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Sarah. Sorry we didn't have more time with you, and I hope that we will be having more of these soon.
Can we just like show some love? I don't know if the chat is open again. Maybe Amy can help open it, but takes a lot to go and recover these histories that have been obscured. So thank you, Max and Sarah. I'm gonna give us a little musical exhale. I've always been searching for a way to weave Brandy Carlisle into our liberatory agenda, and I found it. So I am going to play a song called The Highwomen, and there's a song about, it's told from the point of view of, and you'll hear an Indigenous woman, a Black woman freedom fighter, a woman preacher, and a witch, a woman who was and you'll hear in the ways that we just heard from Max and Sarah how all of these stories of the persecution of oh, here we go, of land-based cultures, of the global South, of people of color, bodies of color, and of women are also interrelated. And I think we'll hear this in the song. So the invitation is just to be with the words of this song, and at the end, we will send you into groups.
From my youth, for my children, I did what I had to do. My family left Honduras when they killed the Sandinistas. We followed a coyote through the dust of Mexico. Every one of them except for me survived, and I am still alive. I was a healer, I was gifted as a girl. I laid hands upon the world. Someone saw me sleeping, naked in the noon sun. I heard witchcraft in the whispers, and I knew my time had come. The bastards hung me at the Salem gallows hill, but I am living still.
I was a freedom rider when we thought the South had won. Virginia in the spring of '61. I sat down on the Greyhound that was bound for Mississippi. My mother asked me if that ride was worth my life. And when the shots rang out, I never heard the sound, but I am still around.
And I'll take that ride again and again and again and again and again. I was a preacher, my heart broke for all the world, but teaching wasn't righteous for a girl. In the summer I was baptized in the mighty Colorado. In the winter I heard the hounds and I knew I had been found. And in my Savior's name I laid my weapons down, but I am still around. We're the highwaymen, we sing a story still untold. We carry the sons you can only hold. We are the daughters of the silent generations. You send our hearts to die alone in foreign nations. They may return to us as tiny drops of rain, but we will still remain. And we'll come back again and again and again and again and again. We'll come back again and again and again and again and again.
Thank you, Brittany. We are going to move towards breakout groups. We have questions in the chat. Again, hopefully you are know what to do if you don't want to be in a breakout group or if you wanted to be in a BIPOC caucus space. And everyone else will be put into groups of 4 or 5. You'll have 15 minutes. So we wanted to give you more time. We know you want more time. And we are working within the limits of colonial time right now. So please evenly distribute your time. And we ask these 2 questions. How does what was shared impact you? How do you feel? And now that we've learned about mother law, the doctrine, and how this logic hurt land, women, and people of color around the world, hearing this arc, what has become clearer for you? And what questions are arising? So with that, please go ahead and join your breakout groups, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back. We know that was just skimming the surface. I hope.
Thank you, Molly. We didn't get to wrap up, so thank you, Molly. I was in group 50 with Molly. Just
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, y'all. I don't mean to. We gotta keep moving here. Thank you for whatever conversations you are having. I'm going to invite the Theological Council to be spotlit with me. And as we do that, if there's a word or a phrase from your conversation that's just ringing with you, I invite you to share it in the chat. You know, what's becoming clear for you? And in at this point in the series, what's becoming clear for you? And we will have our Theological Council come and share with us. Can I get some help with the Theological Council?
Yep, I'm on it. You just.
All right. Well, Theological Council, I asked you a question beforehand, and who knows if you got to it. But I asked what some specific examples were of ways in which what we've heard today has become dominant Christian theology and spiritual teaching. How is what we've heard today living in our spiritual systems, and what have we internalized, and what does that cost us? And then also, as women, as non-binary folks, or gender expansive people, What must we break free of in order to remove our consent from this ideology? How can we resource ourselves in spiritual tradition to do so? And what might we gain from that? So I'm curious what came up for you all. I know it was unfinished, so feel free to like bring out whatever pearls happened or were in process. Don't make me pick on someone.
Okay, I could jump in. Yes, it was so overwhelming, first of all, for all of us. And that just expressed an appreciation for Sarah's invitation for us to stand and get some integration in the body going. And one of the things I shared was about Max's beginning when she talked about the grandmother stones and the altars to the women and those earlier like talismans that maybe they're things we can just touch, something that keeps us steady through all of this. And as we were going through the process, I remembered that in my own Eastern European heritage, there was an image of the Black Madonna that was passed on in my family. So it's this image called Our Lady of Czestochowa. And so it's the Black Madonna with these slit marks across her cheek. So she's a Black Madonna, but she's a representation of divinity and matter. So the Black Madonna is holding the Christ, or divinity. And the story was that she represents divinity blazing through matter, or the holiness of bodies, or the sacredness of our embodiment, the sacredness of the flesh. And not only ours, but all bodies, the bodies of all beings in the cosmos. And as I was listening to the stories of, the horrors of the witch burnings and etc., it felt like something that was that image of the Black Madonna was that like the song that Brittany played that will come back again and again and again and again, that you can't silence this powerful icon, but what that representation of the icon is, it's deep in our genetic structures that we know this, the body, the sacredness of matter, the sacredness of all bodies. So, and then finally, kind of juxtaposing that with, the what is happening to bodies, what has happened to bodies in the church. I'm thinking of religious life, which I'm a part of, and there's a whole history of covering the body, of the body is bad, there's no room for sensuality, sexuality, expression of bodily love. All of this is kind of tied in, and then in just a general way, bodies that are even now monopolized by the sorry, but with this doctrine of discovery, it's filtering into every aspect of my life. And I've been walking along the sea here in Peru, and I'm looking at the bodies of women who are been given a certain type of a bathing suit to wear, for example, by the fashion industry. So now everyone is in this type of a bathing suit that is so revelatory. It's like, why bother even wearing a bathing suit? And so my critical mind is like, my gosh, this is the doctrine of discovery right here in the fashion industry at this time. A certain sense of like, a woman has to look like this, your tummy has to be very flat if you have a flabby stomach, and etc. So it's getting into my own experience of a practical and felt sense of even my own self of like, I should look a certain way. I need to, maybe, I feel myself, should I say, inside of that, the spin of that. it could be in very subtle ways, but still like, yeah, it's affecting. So that's all coming up as a result of this, and very grateful to Max and to Sarah. Thank you, and to all of you.
I am thinking about, I think I shared this on the last session, I'm not sure, but it's really been with me.
Francie, there's some wind coming and it's hard to hear you. So maybe just get a little closer too.
We want to hear you. Just
We want to hear you.
get your face real close.
I was trying to see if I could block out the noise.
It's better now.
Okay. I feel like the wind's about to pick up. I've been thinking a lot about the etymology of heresy, meaning to choose. I think I talked about this last session, but there's something about this. There's something about there's something about heresy meaning choice that I feel like is really important to look at. And the way that we Christianity and patriarchy controlling people with women's bodies, birthing people's bodies now, and this kind of this violence of control of choice and consent, and what it is, the kind of I'm just with a like reclamation of heresy which might be heretical to say, but just this idea of what it is to reclaim heresy as a choice, and what it is to have agency there. And I'm also thinking of something that I just read in the People's Bible, which is a Bible that has a commentary from several scholars of color, biblical scholars of color. And I was just looking at Deuteronomy 32:18 that reads, "You were unmindful," this is in the New Revised Standard Version, "You were unmindful of the rock that bore you. You forgot the God who gave you birth." And I feel like they forgot about the God who gave them birth, okay? And Wilda Gaffney, Black womanist theologian, add some commentary here at this part of the text, and writes, "God our mother." The last phrase of verse 18 can also be translated, "You forgot the God who writhed in labor with you." God nurses Israel in verses 13 to 14. These are examples of divine maternity. God also writhes in labor to give birth to the mountains in Psalms 92 and the hills in Job 15:7. The biblical authors were comfortable describing God in maternal terms. Contemporary readers frequently choose one gender for God by appealing to some scriptures while censoring others. The inclusion of masculine and feminine divine language reminds us that God transcends our categories. So I'm with what that invitation there from Wilda Gaffney, and to honor a God writhing in labor, and what that invites us into. Pass it back to the center.
I appreciate what both Bronte and Gail offered in terms especially of reclaiming those places where God might be evident and experienced in maternal form, because the piece that I'm still sitting with is a very deep sense of grief and paralysis, with a new layer, a new dimension that Max's presentation, putting it all in one place. A few sessions ago, I think one of our teachers talked about the experience of Indigenous people being in the court of the conquerors. And it just, for those who might be experiencing what I'm experiencing, my own affiliation with the Catholic Church in America, that I'm in the church of the conquerors. I'm in the church of the witch burners and the enslavers. And Max shared a figure who was burning witches in Europe and then was bishop here in the US. And I think that within our history, those figures very often in American Catholic history, those male figures who were the participants in that horror, many of them still are elevated in statue and image. And so the courage to tap into the grandmother stones and the courage to call that out. So it's somewhere between grief and paralysis and the courage to call that out with some of the witness to the grandmother stones and the God who it transcends that death dealing.
Sarah, do you have a word or a pearl to share?
I think I heard in the Theological Council conversation many different forms of overwhelm, and coming from many different places, and connecting with ancestors that might not be the ones you've been taught to connect with, or may not be the ones that have been lifted up for you, wherever you may be. And it's overwhelming sometimes, that kind of initial experience. And like, oh, right, all these folks too. And it's easy to get intellectual about it, and it's easy to kind of like get into the what do we do and how does this help us today. And what I find is the value of being with it for a while and trusting that the actions will come, and trusting that what it means to connect differently and to rebuild that circle together will come, and to know that, you know, part of rejoining, part of that circle mending itself is to feel the space in between, to feel the hand that's reaching to you, but right now it's empty. And to just to actually feel the space, and to pray for that connection to keep coming, because it can and it will. And our ancestors, you know, all those who were burned, and I think many of the ones doing the burning, many of the men who were impacted by this, we didn't talk about this, a huge impact on men. Many of the men who were impacted, and many of the women who betrayed their friends and sisters and neighbors who were impacted. They prayed for this moment. You know, they prayed for us today to be able to be in these conversations today. And even though they didn't know what we would look like, or know where we would sit, or know that we would have this thing called Zoom, like, we are very much, we are here because of their prayers. And maybe that prayer was a scream, or maybe that prayer was a silence. But to really, and this is kind of, yeah, and to, like, you know, really not in the process of doing that, to see where we're complicit today. Right. So it's just both this compassion, and to see really clearly how we are complicit today, and how we are the beneficiaries of empire, and how we are the beneficiaries of this system, and how we can do something different.
Yeah, it's that both and of mother law and what is invited in by our partners at this moment, like what we can reaching for the grandmother stones, and holding that wholeness, trying to hold onto that wholeness in including in the ways in which that requires reckoning with the ways in which we benefit, or some of us benefit from empire in different ways. I would love to, we're gonna have to move towards closing, but I would love to share this this prayer. I was gonna do this at the end, but because this is So here in this conversation with you all as a council, I want to share this prayer from the siddur that I use sometimes of Hebrew priestesses, a Kohenet school by Jill Hammer and Taya Sher. And this is a prayer called Goddess, My Soul, Elotai Neshama. Goddess, the soul you gave me is timeless. You birthed her, you shaped her, you breathed her into me, and you guard her within me, and within the fullness of time, you will take her from me and return her to me again as the future unfolds. All the time that my soul is in me, I will be grateful before you, goddess of myself and of my mothers, as full of happenings as a pomegranate, fountain of all soul streams. Blessed are you, Shekhinah, who joins the soul with the body. So with that, like just an invitation to be with your soul and body as we close this session, and to hold that contradiction, hold that paradox, and also just the compassion for your own soul that was given to you. Thank you, Theological Council. I'm going to give a little preview of next week and the homework. This week, folks, we have an exciting update in that we have worked quite hard to create a bit of writing about mother law and Complicit No More. And we've done that with our partners, Mama Bear and Michelle and others. And so one option for your homework this week is to read this essay that we've worked on with many others. That is an introduction that hopefully will help you integrate these first 4 sessions and will be pointing us towards where we're going. So that is one of the options for this homework, is to read that essay and to take it with you on a walk or to do some free writing or reflection. And the other option for this week's homework is to listen to the song that Brittany shared, The Highwomen, which is by The Highwomen as well. It's a group of artists that came together for that song in particular. We'll give you some links for the song on YouTube and Spotify, and we have some instructions for a particular kind of contemplation that we want to invite you into as you listen to that song. So those are 2 options for your homework this week. You'll receive them in your email with more instructions and links and all the things you'll need. Brittany, anything you want to add about that?
No.
Okay. And then next week, we are turning the corner into a very different phase of this series, which is reaching into a lineage of holy resistance. We'll be joined by Katie Gordon, who will be speaking about the women within the Christian tradition that really tried to resist empire in the ways that, in their own contexts. Not in all ways, but in some important ways. And it's important to remember those things and to resource ourselves within our own lineages if we are Christian or come from that background. So that will be next week. Excited to learn about Hildegard and Bridget and Teresa of Avila and the ways in which they were resisting the imperial church and its subjugation of women. And doing so in community. So excited to see you next week. And with that, maybe we can play The Highwomen again and folks can come off mute and say goodbye.